If you recall, when I was in the pulpit last, I had spent some time on Joshua, and my intention is to now try to move into Judges, but I don't want to make any solid commitment to that because I don't know that I will be able to spend a lot of time there. But I do want to present some basic observations that stood out to me as I am going back through the book again. And I think someone here has said before that we try in this place to occupy middle ground. And what you get out of that is both sides hate you left and right, which is not a fun place to be. And I do want to try to provide a middle-of-the-road look at Judges. I feel like it can be a book that is maybe sometimes used to guilt other Christians or beat them over the head, maybe, because of some of the basic observations that are made, and we'll get to that in just a moment if you're not clear on what I mean by that. And I feel like when anyone starts discussing leadership, that's a pretty serious topic, and I want to do it justice. But as I said, these will be some simple observations this morning, nothing too heavy. And I will say in this place, I feel for my part that there is a lot to be said and has been said about a congregation being self-sufficient. And I think we've talked about that a lot here, and we have talked about wanting to make sure that we strive to attain to that level where everyone finds a part, they plug in, they contribute, and that in and of itself is a sign of growth and maturity when every part of the body does its part to the edification of the body. And we all know that Paul uses a literal body as the illustration of that. Every part works together to supply edification to the body. Ephesians 4:11, case in point, he gave some apostles, some prophets, evangelists, pastors, and teachers for what purpose? The perfecting of the saints. And we have said numerous times that is not sinlessness. It is the idea of completion, moving to maturity for the work of the ministry, for the edifying of the body of Christ, from whom the whole body fitly joined together and compacted by that which every joint supplies, according to the effectual working in the measure of every part. That's a mouthful. Making increase of the body, that's the goal, unto the edifying of itself in love. 1 Corinthians 12:23. Those members of the body which we think to be less honorable, upon these we bestow more abundant honor. Verse 25, that there should be no schism in the body, but that the members should have the same care one for another. And 1 Corinthians 14:26, how is it then, brethren, when you come together, every one of you has a psalm, has a doctrine, has a tongue, has a revelation, has an interpretation. Let all things be done unto edifying. So he's saying all of these individuals in the body, they have these different gifts. But the ultimate goal is that you use them, pool them all together so that we all grow together. Colossians 3:16. Let the word of Christ dwell in you richly in all wisdom, teaching and admonishing one another. In psalms, hymns, and spiritual songs. Romans 12:10. Be kindly affectioned one to another, with brotherly love and honor, preferring one another, not slothful in business. And I have made this observation, and I think others have as well. A lot of times people will look at Romans 12:11 and they will say, well, that means do a good job at work. I don't disagree with that. But in this context, he's talking about spiritual pursuits, not slothful in business, fervent in spirit, serving the Lord. Galatians 4:6, let every man prove his own work and bear his own burden. Galatians 6:9, same context. As we have therefore opportunity, verse 10, let us do good unto all men, but especially unto them who are of the household of faith. So, I think that's enough to solidify the point. We have talked a lot about everyone here plugging in and all of us growing together to maturity. But this morning I want to look at a different side to the coin. 1 Samuel 8. Then all the elders of Israel gathered themselves together and came to Samuel unto Ramah, and said unto him, Behold, thou art old, and thy sons walk not in thy ways. Now make us a king to judge us, like all the nations. But the thing displeased Samuel when they said, Give us a king to judge us. And Samuel prayed unto the Lord, and the Lord said to Samuel, Hearken unto the voice of the people, and all that they say unto thee, for they have not rejected thee, but they have rejected me, that I should not reign over them. And I think typically we look at this in hindsight, and we say, as Christians, who are humans just like these people are, we say, what an insult to God. Y'all know better than this, to be asking for a king. You know that's not the way He ordained it. But here God is saying, that's fine. I'm going to work with this. And then we would add on top of that, we look at these Israelites and we say, tisk, tisk, asking for a king. Boy, just like the other nations. What's wrong with y'all? Don't you have any faith? But it's not like they never had earthly leadership up to that point, right? You say, well, you're supposed to be trusting in God and Him alone. Well, wait just a minute. That's not realistic though, is it? Exodus 3:10, I'm not saying that God is not always there orchestrating, but He's going to have mediators, mediation, some method in which He dispenses His authority, and He places His ordination on it. Exodus 3:10, Come now therefore, and I will send thee unto Pharaoh, that thou mayest bring forth my people, the children of Israel, out of Egypt. And Moses said unto God, Who am I? Now, pause here for a second. Ian had a point about this several weeks ago when he was discussing meekness. And we looked at the excuses that Moses made. And I think his observation, he can correct this if he wants, if this is not correct. The observation in general was the idea that that wasn't necessarily meekness. This would be Moses saying, I'm a bit scared here and I don't think I'm up to the task. But if you go back and look in Acts chapter 7, what you'll find is that Moses was actually trained in all the ways of Egypt. So certainly it was the case that he, being put in a position of authority and been exposed to their levels of education, their politics, and whatever he had at that level of power, he wasn't a dummy. He would have had some ability to manage people. I can't imagine that he wouldn't have. And being trained in a particular kingdom where he's expected to manage slaves and maintain his master's house and whatever else comes with those responsibilities, he's not going to be an idiot. So here you have Moses saying to God, Who am I? Well, wait just a minute. You're somebody, and God is putting His trust in you that I should go unto Pharaoh, that I should bring forth the children of Israel out of Egypt. And He said, Certainly I will be with thee, and this shall be a token unto thee that I have sent thee. The Lord thy God, Moses would say later on, to the children of Israel, will raise up unto thee a prophet from the midst of thee, of thy brethren, like unto me. Now, I just would imagine, given the rough mileage that the Israelites would be having with Moses, some would say, who does he think he is? A prophet like me? Are you somebody special? Well, that's not what he's saying. He's saying, God is giving me authority, but I do have authority. And at some point, He's going to raise a leader like me, but better, and you've got to listen to him. So, when you have the Israelites saying, we want a king like the other nations, it's not that they're asking for a king. There's something else at work here. It's not like they never had earthly leadership. Joshua 1:1. Now after the death of Moses, the servant of the Lord, it came to pass that the Lord spake unto Joshua, the son of Nun, Moses' minister, saying, Moses, my servant, is dead. And we looked at this a few weeks ago. Now therefore arise, go over this Jordan, thou and all this people, unto the land which I do give them, even the children of Israel. There shall not any man be able to stand before thee all the days of thy life. Now, what does that mean when he says that? Does that mean nobody can stand in front of him and look at his face? Or is he saying nobody will be ahead of you? You are at the front of the line. You are the leader. You are in charge. Nobody will be in front of you with respect to authority and leadership. No man will be able to stand before thee all the days of thy life. As I was with Moses, so I will be with thee. I will not fail thee nor forsake thee. Certainly we would say God is always behind things, even though he's really in the front. But we would say God is really at the peak of the organizational chart, but he still has to have someone working for him on his behalf. I will not fail thee nor forsake thee. Nevertheless, I'm giving you charge. Nobody will stand in front of you. You are the leader. Deuteronomy 34:9. And Joshua the son of Nun was full of the spirit of wisdom, for Moses had laid his hands upon him. And we would see that particular concept, practice, carried forth into the New Testament. You are basically conferring your authority on other individuals by laying your hands on them. That's a sign and a significance of transferring of authority. And the children of Israel hearkened unto him and did as the Lord commanded Moses. But, just like Moses, Joshua and his generation, not just Joshua, but he had a cohort of individuals working with him for a time and beyond him for a time. But just like Moses, Joshua and his generation, they can't live forever. And we've talked about this recently. The idea of generational change, and this is a constant theme that always sticks out in my mind. And we have individuals in the church that have written different pamphlets and information about what comes with generational change. Things will change. Joshua and his generation, they can't live forever. Judges 2:7, and the people served the Lord all the days of Joshua and all the days of the elders that outlived Joshua, who had seen all the great works of the Lord that he did for Israel. And Joshua the son of Nun, the servant of the Lord, died, being 110 years old. And then what do you think happens? And I know you know the story, but we're putting these pieces together as we lay a foundation. Joshua, a good leader, and a generation that worked with him, making a difference, who had seen all the great works of the Lord that he did for Israel, he dies, and what happens? Things go south. And you say, boy, what a letdown. One person, it's really not one person, but you would say, one person dies and the whole thing falls apart? Well, wait a minute now. Let's be fair. And also, all that generation were gathered unto their fathers, and there arose another generation after them which knew not the Lord. Now, the text doesn't say this, but I'm just riffing on this from human nature. Do you think it's the case that there were pockets of people in this generation that were trying as best they could? Maybe it was in seclusion. But maybe there were a handful, a sprinkling of people throughout these generations that would say, we know this is not right. So we're going to do the best that we can to hold the territory, even though the rest of the people around us won't do what's right. Do you think it was the case that the entire generation went off? Maybe that's the case, but I'd like to think maybe there were people there that would say, this isn't right. But maybe we're limited in what we can do right now, but that doesn't mean we just give up and fold up. There arose another generation after them, which knew not the Lord, nor yet the works which he had done for Israel. And the children of Israel did evil in the sight of the Lord, and served Balaam. And they forsook the Lord God of their fathers, which brought them out of the land of Egypt, and followed other gods, of the people that were round about them, and bowed themselves unto them, and provoked the Lord to anger. And they forsook the Lord, and served Baal and Ashtaroth. And the anger of the Lord was hot against Israel, and he delivered them into the hands of the spoilers that spoiled them, and he sold them into the hands of the enemies round about them, so that they could not any longer stand before their enemies. Now, Caleb has made this observation. What was the big problem with these generations in the judges, in the times of Samuel, and the kings and the prophets? Was it because they weren't obedient to the law in a perfect fashion? Or was it in fact because, verse 13, they forsook the Lord and they went to other gods? So what if there were people in this instance who said, even though we have poor leadership, we're not going to abandon the Lord entirely. We're not going to go off serving other gods. Maybe other people around them did, but maybe some people said, we're going to try something different, even though we're not in the majority. It's possible. Now here's the usual take. Back on track. That was a bit of a sidetrack. Here's the usual take on judges. I'm not saying this is wrong, and I'll make a point with this as we move along, but I would like to expand on the thought that we're looking at this morning with regard to leadership. The usual take is this: the only consistency that you find with Israel in Judges is the cycle of apostasy and repentance. Now, we're saying, we're Christians, we get that, but we're also human beings. You look back at Israel and you say, they would sin, fall away, they would give up entirely, repent, and come back. Now, I'm not saying that we do that on a daily basis. Surely we don't. But you think about what you do as a Christian on a weekly or monthly basis. And this may be a poor illustration, but I've heard people say, Christianity is not a straight line. You're kind of weaving back and forth. Now, I think Caleb may have undone that illustration at some point in the past. I don't remember. We can talk about that later. But anyway, you just think to yourself, from one human being to another, and you look at them and you say, what a shame. These people are a joke. Well, that can be a bit harsh, maybe. People say, shame on them. They knew better. But you could also take a moment and say this: good leadership matters. And when it's absent, there's going to be trouble. That's just human nature. And someone would object and say, well, they have God. It's not like they don't have a leadership. Well, let's be realistic now. Good leadership matters. Titus 1:5. For this cause left I thee in Crete, that thou shouldest set in order the things that are lacking, and ordain elders in every city, as I had appointed you. Paul is saying, with regard to Crete, good leadership is lacking. He's not saying they're just a total wreck, but he's saying it's lacking, and I sent you to Crete. One of the express purposes was to ordain leadership in every city. 1 Peter 5:1, the elders which are among you I exhort, whom also am an elder. And Johnny has brought this up in the past when we have studied about leadership and the eldership in particular. It's not like the men who are in leadership capacity in an official sense as elders are expected to be perfect individuals. When you go back to Acts 15 and Galatians 2, you have Paul rebuking Peter to his face. Then you have Peter saying later, I'm an elder. And then Paul would write in 1 Timothy 5, the elders that sin rebuke before all. What does that mean? The elders are going to make mistakes. Does that alone disqualify them? Feed the flock of God which is among you, taking the oversight thereof, not by constraint, but willingly, not for filthy lucre, but of a ready mind, neither as being lords over God's heritage, but examples to the flock. Good leadership matters, and it's ordained of God. When the chief shepherd shall appear, you shall receive a crown of glory. Now, I'm going to say I don't know what that means specifically, because you would say to yourself as a Christian, well, I thought we were all going to get crowns of glory. Why is he extracting or separating the leadership out in a different capacity here? I don't know that I have an answer for that. But all I know is he said, when the chief shepherd shall appear, the leadership here is said to be receiving a crown of glory when that time comes that fades not away. Now, you contrast that to poor leadership in Acts chapter 20, verse 28. And I know this is well-worn territory, but we're making different observations here. And he says to the bishops in Acts 20 of Ephesus, take heed to yourselves and to all the flock. Of your own selves, verse 30, shall men arise speaking perverse things to draw away disciples after them. And you just contrast poor leadership to good leadership. And what happens? The people end up latching on to someone that they perceive as a leader, and then they just end up falling away. Well, how's that any different than this? We say to the Israelites and judges, shame on them, they knew better. But they had good leadership that died, and a generation rose that just said, we're not going to do what you say. And that's just how it goes. Hebrews 13:17. Obey them that have the rule over you, and submit yourselves, for they watch for your souls. Paul would say, be followers of me, even as I also am of Christ. Titus 1:7, for a bishop must be blameless as the steward of God. And can we make this point? A lot of modern scholarship for a long time harps on this. And there are brethren, Christians in the church, who will explicitly say in their writings, their goal is this, to make sure that females have an equal capacity in the leadership. Now, I can't help it that God has laid out a particular order, but can we say this? Good female leadership does matter. And somebody says, well, that sounds like an afterthought. It's not an afterthought. That's a huge deal. 1 Timothy 3:11. Even so must their wives. We're talking about the male leadership here. It's not just male leadership. The wives of the male leadership, they are expected to have a leadership capacity too. It's not in an official sense the office of a deacon, the office of a bishop, but that doesn't mean it's not important. Even so must their wives be grave. Now, we don't use that term. It's defined in, what's the Strong's? Sorry, man. It's defined in Strong's as venerable, an honorable person. Even so must their wives be honorable, not slanderers, sober, faithful in all things. Now here's where I want to stop and make a point. When you read a phrase like that, faithful in all things, and you say, boy, I hope my husband is never an elder because I don't think I can live up to that standard. That's a tall order. Does that mean what you think it means? Faithful in all things. Boy, that's a tall order. But look at the qualifications before it, not slanderers. Now, some people have a hard time not spreading rumors. That's a habit that you have to work on. But that's really not a high bar to achieve, is it? You say to yourself, to be an honorable person, I'm just not going to talk trash about my brethren to other people. That's not really that hard, is it, if you focus on it? Not slanderers, sober, a thoughtful person who doesn't drink alcohol and have their senses dulled, can we say? A person who addresses situations in the proper fashion. You don't make jokes when it's inappropriate. You're a sober-minded person, faithful in all things. What does that mean? That doesn't mean perfect. That just means you're a trustworthy and dependable person. Now, Ian stepped out, but he was discussing dependability either last week or the week before. And you think of dependability, and he made this point, as being a person who sometimes has sense enough to say, when a brother or sister asks me to do a particular thing and I know that I don't have time to do it, I'm just going to say, I can't do that right now because I have other commitments. It's just that simple. Now, that's easier said than done. But when it says their wives, female leadership, should be faithful in all things, I think he's just saying, you're a trustworthy person. I know that when I reach out to you or when I ask you to do something, if you say you're going to do it, you're going to do it. Now, boy, let me tell you, when you talk about dependability, and I think about the people that I work with, boy, I could get off on a big tangent about people being dependable. When I text you, just answer your text. When I send you an email, will you just answer your email and respond to it? When I call you on the phone, will you return the call? When I ask you to do something and I give you some responsibility, can you just follow through with it? It don't have to be perfect, but can you treat it like it's important? One of my younger coworkers, I'm not bragging, I'm just making a point. He paid me a compliment. And he said, I can tell you have a good work ethic. Now, if I'm being honest with you, really what he meant was, I think you take your job a little too seriously. But he at least recognizes that I'm serious about what I do because I think it's important and I take pride in it and it's what God expects of me. And I think that's all he's saying here. Good female leadership is trustworthy and dependable. Titus 2:3. The aged women, likewise, And I think there's something to be said about people who age gracefully. And I tell you, if I can whine for a moment, when I hit 40, it was, I don't know why, it was different for me. I didn't have a midlife crisis and go out and buy a Ferrari because I can't afford one. But when you hit 40 and you just say to yourself, boy, my life is halfway over, that's a different period. Or you can say to yourself, Michelle made this comment last night. She said, how did she say it? Those gray hairs serve a purpose. And I said, what does that mean? She said, they're not just for looks, that's wisdom. I've earned those. The aged women likewise, you've got some wisdom. You can impart it. That they be in behavior as becometh holiness, not false accusers, not given to much wine, teachers of good things, that they may teach the young women. Well, big deal. That is a big deal, a very big deal. How many times you just think as a young woman, you wish that you would have had somebody older to turn to, maybe because your mother wasn't there or whatever, I don't know. And you just say to yourself, I wish I had another lady that I could talk to. I don't know what to do in this situation. Romans 16:1. I commend unto you Phoebe, our sister, which is a servant of the church which is at Cenchrea. Now, some individuals would try to leverage this and say Phoebe had an official capacity. I don't see that in the text. There's nothing that seems to indicate, even though the word there would be diakonos, there is no officiality tied to it like there would be in Titus 1 and 1 Timothy 3. Nevertheless, he says, I commend unto you Phoebe, our sister, which is a servant of the church which is at Cenchrea, that you receive her in the Lord as becometh saints, and that you assist her in whatsoever business she has need of you, for she has been a succorer of many. That's some good female leadership. Can you take that away from her? No, not in the least. 2 Timothy 1:5. When I call to remembrance the unfeigned faith that is in you, Timothy, which dwelt first in thy grandmother Lois and thy mother Eunice, or Eunice, however you want to say that, and I am persuaded that in thee also. And people complain about the state of manhood these days, and I think it's in sad shape. And some men, they don't have fathers to teach them how to be good men. And the women, they have to take up the mantle. But these are two women. I don't know what Timothy's father did. It doesn't say that he wasn't there. But you can tell that these two women, they took their job seriously and they made him the man that he was. And he was Paul's right-hand man. I think that's monumental. Two women making a huge difference in the kingdom that would last for who knows how many generations. And we have all the writings that tell us about it. Teamwork makes the dream work, as they say. I know that's cliche, but we'll use it. Judges 2:13. And they forsook the Lord and served Baal and Ashtaroth. And the anger of the Lord was hot against Israel. And he delivered them into the hands of the spoilers that spoiled them. He sold them into the hands of their enemies round about, so that they could not any longer stand before their enemies. Whithersoever they went out, the hand of the Lord was against them for evil, as the Lord had said, and as the Lord had sworn unto them. And they were greatly distressed. Now somebody would say, see, God is angry all the time, the skeptic would say. That's what I get out of the Old Testament. He's just a mad God, constantly waiting to burn you up. And isn't that what Jonathan Edwards said in his sermons? An angry God, however he says the rest of it. Just waiting, lusting, drooling to burn people up. And then the legalists would say about the Israelites, see, these people are pathetic. They can't last for a generation. Nevertheless, verse 16, the Lord raised up judges which delivered them out of the hand of those that spoiled them. Now here's where we marry two particular ideas together. We're talking about leadership. God has ordained leadership. It's a good thing. Even though He is in charge, He is using these individuals to deliver them. Leadership is good. Not only that, people would make these observations about how God is looking at these people, and they would say, God is just mad at them all the time because they can't follow what He said perfectly. See, these people are pathetic. Nevertheless, the Lord raised up judges. How about this? Here is another instance, and this is for me too. Another instance of overlooking God's long-suffering nature in the Old Testament. Ignore that, that's out of order. Judges 2:17. And yet they would not hearken unto their judges, but they went whoring after other gods, bowed themselves unto them. They turned quickly out of the way which their fathers walked in, obeying the commandments of the Lord, but they did not so. So we would say, good leadership matters, but we would also say teamwork makes the dream work. People still have to do their part in it, even with good leadership. Now you would say, well, why don't you make up your mind what direction are we going here? Either it's the people or it's the leaders. No, it's everybody working together. Judges 2:18. And when the Lord raised them up judges, then the Lord was with the judge and delivered them out of the hand of their enemies all the days of the judge. For it repented the Lord because of their groanings by reason of them that oppressed them and vexed them. He's listening all the time, waiting for his children to cry out to him. And it came to pass when the judge was dead that they returned and corrupted themselves more than their fathers, and following other gods to serve them and to bow down unto them, and they ceased not from their own doings, nor from their stubborn way. And the children did evil in the sight of the Lord. And when the children of Israel cried unto the Lord again, the Lord raised up a deliverer. And the Spirit of the Lord came upon him, that is Othniel in this case, and he judged Israel and went out to war, and the Lord delivered Rishathaim, king of Mesopotamia, into his hand, and his hand prevailed against him. And the children of Israel did evil again in the sight of the Lord. But when the children of Israel cried, the Lord raised them up a deliverer. Now, can you say this? That's definitely a pattern. But it's not just a pattern of their mistakes, their infidelity. It's also a pattern of persistent redemption, which means God is persistently, above and beyond our own measure, merciful. Right? And we would say, what is wrong with them? Instead of, God seems to be faithful to his people, even when they aren't to him. And that's good stuff. But there were bad judges too. And it came to pass when Samuel was old that he made his sons judges over Israel. Now the name of his firstborn was Joel, and the name of his second Abiah, and they were judges in Beersheba. And his sons walked not in his ways, turned aside after lucre, took bribes, and perverted judgment. Then all the elders of Israel gathered themselves together and came to Samuel unto Ramah, and said unto him, Behold, you're old, and your sons walk not in thy ways. Now make us a king to judge us like all the nations. And let me tell you, I'm just saying as a human, if I would have been there, I would have said, I'm sick of these dudes. Can we have somebody different? Don't you think you'd be saying that? That's how it is. You think about the presidency. And whether it's the president's fault or not, I don't care who you voted for, Biden or Trump or whoever, whether it's the president's fault or not, if the economy is bad and people think they're not doing well, what do they say? Put somebody else in there. I'm sick of this. That's just how people do. Disillusionment, that can be devastating, not just to the leadership, but to the people, and not just to the people. And the Lord said unto Samuel, Hearken unto the voice of the people and all that they say unto thee, for they have not rejected thee, but they have rejected me. Now here's the compounded problem. When you have bad leadership in place, the knock-on effect is this. People will say, well, God is to blame. None of this is working. So let's just do things a different way. And that's the tack that people take. We don't like how this is going. Even though the rules are the rules, the leadership is failing us, they're doing stuff we don't like, and we want to do something different. We're just not happy. We're not comfortable. And then what do? Another cliche. You throw the baby out with the bathwater. And people will say, well, the men aren't guiding the church the way that they should be. Let's give the women a try at it. I get why people say that. But you just have to say the rules are the rules. But when you have bad leadership, people will say, I don't like the way this is going. And really what they don't realize that they're saying is, I don't like the way God laid this out because his leaders are doing a poor job. And then God gets the blame for it. As we wind down this morning, let's make sure we lay out some realistic standards so that we aren't disillusioned. Another cliche, perfect is the enemy of good. Somebody says, what does that mean? People say, if I can't have it done perfect, I don't want to do it at all. Now, as a fellow perfectionist here, I tend to be that way. And sometimes you can be too hard on people because they don't live up to your standards. Well, what are your standards? They're just yours. You got to be realistic. Perfect is the enemy of good. Would you rather have perfect once in a while or good all the time? There's no such thing as flawless leadership, right? Joshua wasn't perfect. He was a good leader, but he wasn't perfect. Judges 2:21, I also will not henceforth drive out any from before them of the nations which Joshua left when he died, that through them I may test Israel, whether they will keep the way of the Lord to walk therein, as their fathers did keep it or not. Well, wait just a minute. You just said their fathers kept it, but you're saying that Joshua didn't do everything he was supposed to. But God's still working with them. I don't know how that works. Therefore the Lord left those nations without driving them out hastily, neither delivered them into the hand of Joshua. Now, raise your hand if you think Joshua was a terrible leader. You may say, well, nobody else is going to, so I won't. I just don't think anybody would think that. 1 Timothy 5:17. Let the elders that rule well be counted worthy of double honor. You say, well, that's kind of contrary to your point, isn't it? Well, I think there's something hidden behind this. If you have elders that rule well, what does that imply about the other elders? Maybe they're not ruling up to the same standard, but does it say they're not elders? You say, well, you're kind of inserting a bunch of stuff in there that's not there. Maybe so. But he is saying the ones that do rule well, they will be counted worthy of double honor. Well, maybe you have some that don't rule as well as the others, but they're just men. If they're trying, that counts. Now, I'm not saying you ought to put up with subpar leadership. But still, we're saying leadership matters, good leadership matters, but nobody is perfect. As they say, this is what, like the fourth cliche now? There is no I in team. Judges 4:14. And Deborah said unto Barak, Up, for this is the day in which the Lord hath delivered Sisera into thy hand. Is not the Lord gone out before thee? So Barak went down from Mount Tabor. Now this ties all of the elements together. You have God, who is the ultimate authority, but he has all of these people that are in leadership that are working together. So Barak went down from Mount Tabor, and 10,000 men after him. And the Lord discomfited Sisera and all his chariots and all his hosts with the edge of the sword before Barak, so that Sisera lighted down off his chariot and fled away on his feet. But Barak pursued after the chariots, after the host, unto Harosheth of the Gentiles. And all the host of Sisera fell upon the edge of the sword, and there was not a man left. Howbeit, Sisera fled away on his feet to the tent of Jael, the wife of Heber, the Kenite. For there was peace between Jabin the king of Hazor and the house of Heber the Kenite. And Jael went out to meet Sisera and said unto him, Turn in, my lord, turn in unto me, fear not. And when he had turned in unto her into the tent, she covered him with a mantle. And he said unto her, Give me, I pray thee, a little water to drink, for I am thirsty. And she opened a bottle of milk and gave him the drink and covered him. And he said unto her, Stand in the door of the tent, and it shall be, when any man doth come and inquire of thee, and say, Is there a man here? Thou shalt say, No. Then Jael, Heber's wife, took a nail of the tent, and took a hammer in her hand, and went softly unto him, and smote the nail into his temples, and fastened it into the ground, for he was fast asleep and weary. So he died. Now, let's stop there for a second before I make my final point. I'm just saying, as a man. I don't know what it's like to cut a chicken's throat and drain it of blood. Now you just imagine as a man, let's just say, cutting a man's throat. I don't know that I could do that. I mean, I'd have to be, well, if somebody messed with my wife, I might have enough rage to cut somebody else's throat. But I'm just saying, you just think of yourself as a man. Would you have the fortitude to look another man in the eye or sit behind him and cut his throat? There was a movie we watched a while back with, what is that guy who played in Gladiator? I don't think of his name. Anyway, he's playing some assassin, and he walks up behind a guy. They're in the jungle somewhere, puts him in a chokehold and cuts his throat, and as soon as he does it, he heaves and gags and heaves. And then he just continues about his business. I can't imagine that I wouldn't slice another man's throat and then heave after I did it. Now, you just think as a woman, driving a spike through another man's temple to the point that his head is nailed to the ground. And you say, I'm doing this for God. And you don't miss a beat. And behold, as Barak pursued Sisera, Jael came out to meet him and said unto him, Come, and I will show thee the man whom thou seekest. And when he came into her tent, behold, Sisera lay dead, and the nail was in his temples. And God subdued on that day Jabin, the king of Canaan, before the children of Israel. Now, let me ask you this. How many people are synchronized in this complex plot? I haven't counted. I'm saying discount the 10,000 men. How many people do you have working together across boundaries to make sure this is accomplished? As we conclude this morning, there is no I in team, but there is a me, a you, and God. Let's all stand and sing.